So I have to start off this morning by saying that I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay. Now that I've said that, let's get into the word. All week, I've felt like this message is just impossible. I've actually done so many rewrites on this sermon, I don't even know what's left. I mean, basically nothing in here today was what I wrote down on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and even last night. I was up till midnight again revising the last third of this message. So this has been one of those moments that I look at this passage, I look at what Easter is, and I think, I can't do this. I mean, like, take this for instance. Jesus actually gives us in our passage in that first verse probably the shortest Easter message. And it came from the lips of Jesus. Just look at this in verse 31 of Mark 8, if you're there. And it says, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. That's it. That's the Easter message right there. If that's what you came here to hear, then there you go. Jesus just said it in like one sentence. Jesus is kind of spoiling the ending for all of his apostles there and maybe us. I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be tortured. I'm going to be handed over. I'm going to be rejected. Are you focusing here, apostles? Peter, come on. Don't look at the rock. Just look at me. Come on, keep it in here. Then, after I'm killed, I'm going to come back. You got it? See, here's the thing. I read that, and you know what their response was? I mean, verse 32 even says that he said it plainly. Before this, Jesus had used different phrasing. I'm going to build it, or I'm going to tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Like, okay, I don't understand. I'm going to be like Jonah. I'm going to go into a whale for 3 days and come back. I don't understand. Okay, I'm going to die and come back. And this is their response. Verse 32, if you're there. He spoke plainly to them about this. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. I don't know what gave Peter the guts to think this was a good idea. I mean, have you ever watched someone do something really stupid? It just plays out in slow motion. Sometimes we kind of like glory in it, like watching them just downfall. I don't know if the other apostles there were thinking on the same lines of Peter or if they are just sitting back like, we got to watch this happen. Let's see what Peter does here. And Peter, his response to the Easter message is to go up to Jesus and be like, no, you got a lot of stuff to do, Jesus. There's a to-do list here. We got to go into Rome, remember that, and just wipe them out, right? You're going to lead that charge. You're going to kill everyone. Just get Rome out of here. You're going to start a new kingdom here. You don't have time to die. Are you kidding me, Jesus? He starts rebuking him, not even like softly encouraging him. And I don't know what Peter thought Jesus' response to this should be. Like, oh, Peter, thank you for your concern. It matters so deeply to me that you love me in this way. But that's not what happened. Peter goes up to Jesus and rebukes him. And I wonder if all the other apostles were thinking the same way. Like they were sitting there like, you know, when you're hearing someone tell you something you think is like wrong, and you kind of look at the other people and you're like, are you going to tell them? Peter, you're always talking. I mean, why don't you give it a shot? So Peter maybe drew the short end of the stick. I don't know. But when I read this is kind of what I'm talking about here. Because a lot of you are here for the first time ever, or maybe the first time in a long time. And this is just what we do in America traditionally. We go to church on Easter and Christmas. Thank you. All right, 4 of you. All right. I thought it was more common knowledge than that. That's okay. But we go to Easter. We punch in our little church time clock, and then we come back for Easter for round 2. But it's not real. Not in your life, at least. It's just, that's been my struggle this week. Is I want each and every one of you to accept this as truth, but no amount of my wanting is going to make a difference in people's lives. My desires don't change people. That's not how it works. And even here, Jesus is talking to his disciples and he lays it out for them. And I can take solace that at least when Jesus spoke this same similar message, that their response was, nope, you're wrong. I take some solace in that. And maybe some of you are like Peter and the other apostles here today. You're going to hear this message about Jesus resurrecting and you're going to think, I don't think that actually happened. There are some things in the Bible that I'll believe, like Jesus talking, that I can understand. Jesus resurrecting, I don't think so. And you'll probably not come up to me afterwards and say, you were wrong about so many things. I can't believe it. Like even your greeting, you were wrong. Who says that stuff? It doesn't make sense. Or maybe you think, well, it's not true. The Bible's just wrong about this. They got it something wrong. It's been around for a couple thousand years. It must have gotten lost in translation somewhere down the line. I just know that even here, as Jesus is talking to his apostles, Jesus' words didn't change them. So I don't take up a whole lot of hope that mine are going to do a whole lot more. And this isn't the only time that Jesus spoke plainly about what was going to happen. 2 chapters later, in Mark chapter 10, he goes into even more detail, right? He keeps expounding on it. He says to them in Mark 10, we're going to Jerusalem. Now he tells them where it's going to happen. We're going to Jerusalem. I'm going to be betrayed and delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And 3 days later, I'm going to rise. And you know what their response was that time? James and John go up to Jesus and they tried to trick him into giving them something. Jesus just laid it out in detail what's going to happen, and they go up to him, and this is what they say. Hey, Jesus, we want you to do something for us. We're just not going to tell you what it is. Could you agree to that? And Jesus says, what do you want? And they said, well, when you come back in your glory and your kingdom's all set up, what would happen if, I'm just throwing this out there, Jesus, if James was on your left and I was on your right? And Jesus says, can you drink from the cup I'm about to drink from? Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm about to be baptized with? And they look at each other and they look at Jesus and they're like, yep. And then the apostles hear about this conversation and they start arguing with James and John. They start accusing them and getting mad at them. Right after Jesus tells them the Easter story, they're focusing on themselves, and Jesus has to take that moment to teach them what humble leadership in the kingdom of God is supposed to look like. That wasn't what he was talking about, but that's where I had to go, because they were unchanged, because they were focused on themselves. All of this happened right after he was clear. And here we are, 2,000 years later. Do we get it? I mean, we have a lot more going against us than they did. They were standing in Jesus' presence. We're going over the same details that Jesus shared with his disciples. Who didn't get it then? Are we getting it now? And I think most of the people, or not most, but there's going to be people all across this world sitting in Easter sermons and services like this, and they're going to leave unchanged. And you know why? It's not because they're too smart. And it's not because they don't really like Jesus, because in general, people like the idea of Jesus. And it's not because they're too lost or because they're too good. They're going to leave unchanged because of what Jesus says next in our passage. Because Jesus corrects Peter here. He rebukes Peter after Peter tried to rebuke him, and he says, you're only focused on the stuff around you, on the things of man. You're not focusing on God's kingdom. You're not focusing on the spiritual realm. And then he says this, if you're still there, picking up in verse 34, he said, then he called the crowd to him along with the disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. That's it. That's the whole reason why people will leave unchanged today. It's not because they're too good for God or because they're too smart. It's not a mind thing. It's not even a will thing. It's not even a truth thing per se. It's that they're afraid or they're embarrassed. I mean, you look at this, Jesus makes it painfully clear. If you're going to be my disciple, if you want to call yourself a Christian, you have to deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow him. I don't know if we can be this honest, but can we just say no one really enjoys the whole denying self thing? I don't know anyone who's like, that deny yourself thing? That's so cool. It's like my favorite thing in the world. Like, no one says that. It's a tough thing. That's a hard truth for us to accept. Take up your cross. That's what Jesus said here. If you want to be my disciples, if you want a part of my kingdom, you have to deny yourself, which I think means something different than most of us are pondering right now. Because when you talk about denying yourself, when Jesus said that, it's not about cutting everything out of your life except for going to church or something like that. It's not about giving things up. It's not even about self-denial. It's not about a lot of different things. And I'm nowhere near, I skipped completely over here. Oh, this is embarrassing. Anyway, Jesus makes it clear what the call of a disciple is. If you look at this idea, deny yourself, take up your cross daily and follow him, it doesn't preach well. I mean, you think about your traditional Easter sermon, it makes you leave feeling pretty good. Most of the time that I would leave a Sunday service on Easter, I'd be walking out of there like my feet held high. I don't know if that's a saying. My head held high. Probably makes way more sense. If you can walk out of here with your feet held high, then that is just plain amazing. But this passage is probably one of the last things that we really want to bring up on Easter Sunday because we have a lot of visitors here. This does not sound appealing, right? This is not something that if you haven't accepted it, this is probably not what you want to launch into. And it would be very easy to kind of just go around most Easter sermons that I think we hear are funny or lighthearted in theology, easy stuff. Take up your cross daily and follow me. Doesn't quite make the cut there. But the truth is, I know I had a choice. I could pretend like everyone will leave here forever changed by my words, and instead I can just admit that I don't know what I'm doing. Admit that I just have to trust. I think we've spent enough time in churches dressing things up. I mean, we come to church and we look like this. I can guarantee you, if you saw me tomorrow, I'm not going to look like this. I'm going to look slightly different. And my guess is most of you might as well. You might take off that shirt that has the Cheeto crumbs and the beer stains and all that other stuff, because if you came to church wearing that, you think, well, people aren't going to come near me, or they don't think about it. And we do the same thing with our theology too, right? We try to make church all about something that sounds good. We try to hide this other stuff that we think are stains on the Christian faith. Yeah, let's come in. Let's talk about Jesus' love, how he accepts all of us. How cool is that? Deny yourself? Let's hide that for a moment. Let's just not bring that up, because that's tough stuff. And I think when I look at this passage, one of the reasons I struggle with it most is because I see so much of myself in the wrong places. I mean, if you look at this, I see this. I don't want to deny myself. I'm the type of guy that when I eat a pint of ice cream, let's be honest, when I eat a quart of ice cream, it's like the whole thing. When the spoon, Brian Regan talked about that. I know when the ice cream's done, when the spoon hits the bottom, we mean half a cup of ice cream anyway. But like that, there's no self-denial there. I want to save my life. So what do you mean I have to give it up? And I get Jesus' point about, what good is it to forfeit your soul and gain the whole world? But if you look at the world, there's some cool stuff out there. Stuff that I want, stuff that you want. And I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt ashamed. See, I read this, and I think how easy it would be just to sweep it under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. And when we have church services, we have visitors, we just say, well, just don't look at this. Let's just, John 3:16, God so loved the world, he loved you, which is a wonderfully powerful verse. But we can't accept that without this. We can't just say, well, Jesus is love, and then forget what he said. We have to have it all together. And this denying self thing is hard. But like I said earlier, when I skipped ahead of my manuscript and then went back and now we're caught back up, denying yourself, I think, means something different than most of us are probably thinking about right now. And I think James Brooks says it best when he says to deny yourself, it is to place the divine will before self-will. You're still second. I mean, I didn't play many sports growing up, but I can tell you, if I did, I would have been pretty happy with second. Because even when we ran the mile in PE, when there's like 30 kids, I got like 30th. But we think so much, we get so caught up in the negative, oh, I'm not number one anymore. God says, you can still just put my will before yours. That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm saying. You put God's priorities first and then yours. If you really value your life as much as you say you do, then put God's priorities first. And these words could really be taken more literal when they were first spoken, because outside of Judas, and John, who was exiled until his death away from the land that he knew in his home, all the other apostles died for their faith, including Matthias, who was added in the book of Acts. All of them died because of their faith. Why would someone be willing to do that? Because what good would it be to gain the whole world and yet forfeit your soul? See, they finally understood what Jesus was saying here. It finally clicked with them. They eventually would get it. That's how they went from people who, when Jesus told them the truth, they started arguing with it and denying it, to people who were willing to die to see it spread in the whole world. That's how James and John went from people who were thinking selfishly to people who lived selflessly, to see that truth continue on. Because truth, God's truth, changes us. Not words, not hope, truth. And if you're like me, then you've probably heard some things that Christians say is true, and you think to yourself, that just sounds weird. That sounds off. And some of what we learn about truth is a little tricky, but there's other things that we say that isn't even biblical. Like one of the sayings that I've heard many, many times is people who will say, you know what, even if it wasn't true, I'd still live like this. Even if Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, I'd still live like this because I like it that much. If you leave here today and you just think, I can't accept the resurrection, I don't believe that at all. You know what? That's your own thing. That's your decision. What I don't understand is when people leave thinking about the resurrection and their thoughts are, it doesn't really matter. I can't understand that line of thinking. You can deny it, you can accept it. I don't understand that in between of it doesn't really matter. The resurrection is the glue that holds every bit of truth from God together. Without it, we have nothing. Your faith is worthless. And that's not even my words. Just look at Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, 13 and 14. He says, if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ hasn't been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. You know why? Because Christianity isn't about morality. It's not about doing the right things and not doing the wrong things. When you boil it down to that, then okay, that's a weird train of thought. Because you're leaving the resurrection out. You're leaving truth out completely. It's not about that. It's about the truth from God. And that truth from God is held together by the resurrection. Without it, it falls apart and it becomes useless. Everything, this whole stuff, everything that we do as believers would be useless without the resurrection. There's no, if it wasn't true, I would still live the same thing. That doesn't make sense. This is worthless. Paul even says you are to be pitied above all other men if it's not true. And that's why this is so important. These words in Mark chapter 8, if you're going to be ashamed of me here, in this generation, this wicked and adulterous generation, then I'm going to be ashamed of you when I come back in my glory. And that idea of being ashamed, I think, is also something we misunderstand, because it's not about an emotion. It's not just those moments where you feel hesitant to share Jesus. That's more of a side effect of the real problem. Because this idea of ashamed is wrapped up in this idea of something that was said that was never fulfilled. It'd be like if I stood up here today and I said, and when football season starts, the San Francisco 49ers, my Niners, are going to go undefeated, and they're going to make it to the playoffs, and they're going to win the Super Bowl easily against whoever. Patriots, I don't care. They're just going to murder whoever else is in the Super Bowl. And then when the end of the season comes and they finish 5-11 and miss the playoffs again, I would have to stand up here and be ashamed because something I said was not fulfilled. And Jesus says, don't do that to me. Don't stand before this generation of all people and think that I didn't fulfill this, because he did, and he continues to fulfill his promises. Don't be ashamed of them. You have nothing to be ashamed of. So what are you going to do with the life that he paid for by fulfilling those promises? Satan will open every door for you that he can to keep you away from passages like this. Because if you never see a passage like this, even though it's difficult, if you never see a passage like this, you'll never question it. You'll never wonder about it. You'll never think about it. You'll never be challenged by it. You'll never wrestle with it. And if he can keep this away from you, he'll be happy. And even if you do come across it, he'll put feelings and thoughts inside of you and make you look at this and think, oh, those rules. I don't want to follow these rules. It's too much. It doesn't sound fun. But this isn't about rule following. This is about life transformation. It's about refocusing your life away from what you see around you and refocusing it on the things of God. Focusing up on things you can't even see, things you can't even imagine. Jesus, in this moment, is looking at us and he's telling you, I have a life that's bigger than anything you can see here. Don't focus on this stuff. Focus on this kingdom that you get to live with me for eternity. And Satan's right next to us and he's saying, look at these TVs. Those are pretty cool, right? All right, look at this car. I've seen your car. Door handle don't even work. This one does. Look at this house. You know, if you just work a couple extra hours, boy, you can be in that thing. And the whole time, it's like you can hear God whispering through to you, saying, there's more. There's so much more. I heard a pastor once tell a story of a time that he stayed at a Motel 6. And I don't know if you're huge fans of Motel 6s, but they're not exactly a 5-star resort. And right before he had gone to stay at this Motel 6, he had just seen one of those like Dateline episodes where they took the UV light. Okay, so most of you have seen that. You know how disgusting those sheets are. And so that picture of those disgusting sheets was just etched into his memory. And he was going to be staying in this motel for about a week. And so he thought, I'll just go to the store and pick up a cheap pair of sheets so I don't have to sleep on that nasty mattress thing. I mean, I still have to deal with the mattress, but at least I'll have clean sheets. So he went to the store, he picks up the mattress, and he turns around and he happens to notice the towels were on sale. And I don't know if you also know this about Motel 6, but their towels are not exactly Egyptian cotton. In fact, most of the times I've stayed in cheap motels, you can see right through when you held it up to the light. I remember one time thinking, oh, there's a tear in it. Nope, that's literally just the stitching. I mean, it gets you like dry for like half an arm. And so he thought, well, I don't want to deal with their terrible towels for this whole week too. So he thought, well, they're cheap enough. I'll grab a towel. And then he starts walking up to the front and he notices, you ever see these Dyson fans? They're like a big circle, but air just magically moves through them, and it's just like a normal fan, but there's no blades you can see. And he saw that. He's like, oh, man, that is so cool. Okay. Air conditionings in Motel 6s go out a lot, right? I mean, it's not a bad thing, and they're really cool, and I've been wanting one for a while, so he managed to pick up the fan and put it in his cart. And it was about this time, as I was hearing him tell this story, I started thinking, how rich is this guy? Like, those Dyson fans cost quite a bit of money. But he wasn't even done. He kept talking. He said, so I finally got all my stuff in there. I started walking up, and then as he was going, past that like main aisle, he looked over, and of course there's the electronics section. There's a big sign on this glorious 60-inch TV. Sale. And it was like God parted the Red Sea. And all of a sudden, he was standing in front of the 60-inch HD TV, 4K, HDR, beautiful. Even glistened a little when he looked at it. And he thought, I don't know. Pretty sure that TV in the Motel 6 is 32 inches. This would be quite the upgrade. He really thought about it. So he picked up the TV and he put it in his car and he started walking up to the front to pay for everything. And really at this time, I started wondering the authenticity of this story. And that's when he came clean, that of course he didn't buy any of that stuff. He didn't even buy the sheets, which I at least would somewhat understand. But he said, no, I didn't buy anything because it's ridiculous to invest in a motel room you're in for like a week. And yet we do this all the time. I mean, I can't be the only one who gets so focused on the stuff that's around me. On working that much harder, that many more hours, on selling that much more stuff, on sacrificing this or that so I could get that one more thing. And all along, we've been just investing in this motel room that we're in for a week. And we don't notice what God is building for us into heaven. And Jesus is telling us, don't lose your soul to invest in a motel room you don't even own. He told his disciples before he left, I'm going to go and I'm going to build you a place. You're going to be here for a little while, but I'm preparing something awesome for you that you get to live in for eternity. You don't even have to build it. I'm going to go take care of it. And then Satan comes along, and we find ourselves working so hard to beef up our hotel rooms, our motel rooms, and they might be cool. There might be people coming over to look at all your stuff. They might tell you how cool it is. Oh man, I want one of those things. I should get one of that. That is so neat. But all along, you know you're there for a week. And in that week, you're going to leave. And the question is, when you leave your motel room, where are you going? Because Jesus said, you might gain the whole world. Right? He doesn't downplay. He doesn't say non-Christians won't be successful. We know they can be. He might say you gain the whole world, but where is your eternal soul going to end up? Where's it going? Where are you investing your life in right here? This call that Jesus gives his true disciples isn't easy because it forces us to focus on what we can't see. But you can have faith that Jesus is going to fulfill his promises, that there really is a place that's prepared for you, for those who are in Jesus. Because if he kept his promise to rise from the dead, you can bet he'll keep his promise that you will too. Where are you going to go when you walk out of that Motel 6 room? Do you believe it? Thanks, Rich. If not, normally this is about the time we say, well, then come forward and give your life to Christ, which I'm all for. If you feel the Spirit moving in you, telling you this is true, go and accept it, come forward. I'd be glad to pray with you afterwards. You can talk with Pat or Myron or Donna, whoever, pray with someone. But I know it doesn't always happen like that. And if instead you want to have a conversation, let's do that. Sometimes it's hard to have a real conversation when you're up here in the front of the pew. Get with me. Let's go get coffee. I'll even buy you coffee. We didn't budget it, but that's okay. I don't budget for a lot of things anyway. We budget for everything, I promise. But let's go out to coffee. I think that's an aspect of discipleship, an aspect of the church we oftentimes forget about, that we have conversations. Philip, when he met with the Ethiopian eunuch, he didn't go up to him and say, hey, come to church Sunday, and then we can talk then. He just talked. Let's do that. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have doubts, if you have things that have been on your mind, then let's talk. Let's get together. Or find someone that you trust and have that conversation with them. But if you do accept it, focus. Satan doesn't have to get you to deny all of this. He just has to get you to forget most of it. So that way you can go on living and putting more and more stuff into your room, and you forget eternity. You forget the people that God has put around you that you can affect for eternity. That's what Satan wants you to do if you've accepted this. Don't believe that. Don't give in to that lie. We're going to close with a few songs here. And as I started off saying, I can't expect my words to really change anyone. but the Holy Spirit can. And if you've just been missing something, if you've been questioning, you've been concerned, you just don't know how to react, pray. And I mean it, pray, because the Holy Spirit's the only one that will change you. If you have kids or friends or coworkers or parents that you've been praying to be saved, don't just pray it in general. Say, God, open up their minds to understand this, because here's the thing. One of my favorite Easter stories is Jesus. After he resurrects, he's seen by people. People have heard he's back, he's alive, and all this. He goes to his apostles who are all gathered in one room, and he's standing there physically in the room with them, and they look at him and they say, "Oh, it's a ghost!" They're standing in the room with the resurrected Jesus Christ, who was crucified and killed and came back, and they still didn't get it. What makes us think we're going to get it without God's help? What makes you think your kids, your parents, your friends, your coworkers are going to get it without God's help? Because it wasn't until Jesus in Luke 24 opened up their minds that they finally got it. And if you haven't got it, pray. Because God will answer that prayer. If you have people in your life you want saved, pray that Jesus will supernaturally open up their minds and just see what God does. Pray that God will work something in the lives of those people you love and you care about that you know you can't, and see what God can. As we end here, we're going to sing these 3 songs, and we invite you, come forward, take of communion. If you've accepted Jesus Christ, come forward, remember his body, remember his blood, remember that it was raised on Easter on this 3rd day, and he conquered death for you. And you can do this at any point during the 3 songs. Take time to pray for yourself, pray for those friends, pray for your life, pray for each other. Whatever it is, you have 15 minutes or so that you can be praying. You can be praising and worshiping God with all that you are. You're not going to get that most likely for the rest of this week. Don't waste this time. Give it up to God and see what he does. If you're able, please stand and let's praise him now.